Welcome to the Brett.Johnson.biz podcast, where we discuss business on purpose, radically fresh leadership, capital that transforms society, and marketplace stories that embolden difference makers. Welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. Are we dealing with business as usual at the moment, or are we at an inflection point in history? Are the troubles that we see in the world, the political upheavals, the economic upheavals, societal upheavals, are these things just more of the same, or are we actually dealing with an inflection point in history? The way we answer this question will set our mindset for how we plan strategy for the next 10 to 20 years. So let's unpack this a little bit. Before we do so, let me touch on the scripture where Jesus is coming towards the end of his time on earth, and he contrasts three different times. He says to his disciples, "In the past, when I told you to go out and to not take a purse or money with you, did you lack anything?" And they said, "No, we didn't lack anything." And then he said, "But now, if you don't have a purse, get one. If you don't have a money bag, get one. If you don't have a sword, trade in your cloak for a sword because you're going to need it." And then they respond. Jesus gives them some explanation. So he says to them, there's a different season going on. And I'd like to unpack that season and talk about this a little bit. So if we are just dealing with business as usual, a slight bump in the road, a wrinkle in time, that's one thing. If we are in a shift between major eras, major seasons, then the question is, what is the future likely to look like? And what do we do in the awkward in-between? In a conversation with a friend recently, he described it as being on a trapeze. In order to go from one side to the other, you have somebody who is swinging and holding you by the arms, but in order to reach the catcher, you have to let go. Before you can grab onto the new thing, you have to let go. And I believe that in this passage, Jesus is talking about that unusual in-between season. And it was a season in between the old Jewish law, the way things were done, and the new way that was going to come about after the death, suffering, and resurrection of himself, of his own life. In fact, he unpacks that a little bit. Let me just read it to you over here. He said to them, "Remember when I sent you out without money, a bag, or sandals? Did you need anything?" The apostles said, "No." Jesus said to them, But now, if you have money or a bag, carry that with you. If you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one." The scriptures say he was considered a criminal, speaking of himself. This scripture must happen. It was written about me, and it is happening now. The followers said, "Look, Lord, here are 2 swords." And he said to them, "That's enough." So that's the passage we're considering. So let's talk about pivotal points in history. What do you think they are? And what are the fulcrum points upon which history has turned? Now, you can go to different sources. For example, if you go to Grok, I went there and asked, what are the top inflection points in history? It says, well, it's a tricky question, depends on the lens that you're looking through. But these are the 7 that they gave. The invention of writing, which was 3400, 3100 BC. And then the axial age, where you got sort of 800 to 200 BC, where you got thinkers like Confucius, Buddha, Socrates, and so on, laying out a bunch of paradigms for scripture. Interestingly, no mention of Jesus and his coming. That doesn't feature in their list. The next is the fall of the Western Roman Empire, followed by the rise of Islam. So that makes the list in terms of from 610 to 632 CE or AD. And then the invention of the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, and the Digital Revolution. So these are the things that are listed there as key inflection points in history. What would be on your list? Because when you're changing from the Industrial Revolution to the Digital Revolution, your business assumptions change. But if you're just in the information age and you have what they call the digital revolution, I think probably others would have called it the information age or the information era, the terms change. But if you're still within one era, then the general rules apply. The question is, with the advent of AI, with, you might say, the weakening of the global order of things, certainly globalism, is that a change? With the resetting of trade policies around the world, is that a sea change or is that just a tweak in an economic policy? What about digital currencies? The move towards CBDC, central bank digital currencies, the instability among currencies in the world, the desire of the BRICS countries to disintermediate the dollar, and then central banks themselves talking about having their own stable coins and currencies. Is this a change in an era? Is this going to be that we'll look back and say, remember when we used to use paper and coins? Remember when there was the US dollar or the euro? Or is this just, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, not such a big deal? What kind of change are we dealing with over here? Our answer to that question, as I said, will cause us to think about strategy differently. Now, let me give you another list. So that was Grok that gave me those answers. You might not like Grok. You might prefer ChatGPT. So what did ChatGPT have to say about inflection points in history? So first is the agricultural revolution. Kind of interesting. Yeah, so this is a bit of an economic lens on things. So humans transitioned from hunter-gatherer, as we know, to farming, plowing, sowing, reaping, barns, etc. And that changed certainly the economics, but it also changed things around the rise of cities, complex societies, property rights, etc. And so, and certainly longer term planning than if you're just going to go out and kill a deer or kill something else to eat. So that's a big one, and that was about 10,000 BC. The next one was the invention of writing. That also comes up as one. So language emerged in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and that meant that you could codify things, record things, and so forth. By the way, yesterday I saw a little thing about the oldest known human structures are in the middle of nowhere in Mpumalanga in South Africa and stretch from there up into Zimbabwe. These stone structures, way, way bigger, covering thousands of hectares, bigger than Stonehenge and so on. I don't know who built them. They say it's an indication of an advanced society and so on. We don't really know. That's just an aside. Then the next one that ChatGPT talks about is the birth of monotheism. So that is one God versus many gods. And so the emergence of an ethical monotheism, particularly through Judaism, was a big game changer in the world. And it shifted moral authority from rulers on earth, who were sometimes considered to be gods, to actually a divine being, a divine will, which then changed justice, law, and that impacted Christianity and Islam following it, and that shaped the lives of billions of people. If we all still believed that there were many gods, everybody could do what was right in their own eyes, if we didn't have a sense of accountability to a divine being, to a monotheistic God, the planet would look quite different today. Okay. Fourth thing, fall of the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, and the collapse of the centralized authority of Rome. That makes the list in both cases. That fragmented Europe into lots of smaller kingdoms, and set the stage for a feudal system and the rise of the church as a power. So as Rome fell, the church became more important and so forth. Then the next thing they call it is the scientific revolution, and breakthroughs in the scientific front had an impact, and there were thinkers like Galileo, Newton, Locke, Voltaire, and so on. And so that shifted authority from traditional perspectives to that of reason, individual rights, and the rise of secularism, democracy, and what some would call the modern scientific method. So they would say, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment still impacts us today, because some of those ideas coming out of the Enlightenment are informing our thinking today, for sure. Then the Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840, roughly over here, mechanized production, urbanization, people moving from farms into cities, mass transportation began in Britain, and that transformed not just physically, but social structures, environments, gave rise to capitalism, working class, and the modern state, you could say. And there's just a fascinating history within the UK of the guilds as those were formed, and run most of them on biblical principles that formed the essence of a fabric of the economy in the UK, which is just a great thing to understand and to look at. And then from the 1940s onwards is the digital revolution. So what happened from computers to AI, the information age begins. And so communication, education, economics, all of those things begin to change. In some respects, I look at these things and I think about how certain things became democratized. We talk about democracy, but actually throughout history, you begin to see how things such as the means of production, access to God, religion being democratized, access to capital, access to knowledge with the, I think the Gutenberg press was voted one of the top inventions of the last 500 years. The question is, with AI, with robotics, with some of the things that are happening nowadays, is this just a tweak, or is it something that's quite different? So, back in the early 1990s, we were living in Silicon Valley. I remember in 1995, we held a conference called Christians and the Internet. I explained that missions would be done over the Internet one day. We had people explaining what the Internet was and so forth. And that was just the version 1.0 of the web world, if you like. And it was really brochureware where people were taking their information, just putting it up online, pages that scrolled, linked to pages and so forth. No interaction. In the second era, in Web 2.0, things became more interactive and things became more embedded into core business processes. So, for example, back-end systems such as your bank systems became front-end because you could access your own bank account, see the transactions. You didn't have to walk up to a teller, renting a car, etc. So the whole operating model got exposed to the customer. You no longer had front office and back office. Almost everything became customer facing. In Web 3.0, it goes to a whole new level of transparency and interaction. And the interaction and preferences of the actual customer shape what the systems should look like, access to information and so forth. Right now, we still have this conflict going on in the world of politics. We see old school politicians thinking that they can hide things from the people. And we have the people saying, no, 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 we're a new breed of people. We are an alternative media group. We are an alternative generation. And if you do something that is suspect, we're going to question you and we're probably going to find out about it. Whereas in the olden days, you could get away and bury things with secrecy. Now there's still a shift going on there, but the perception of the emerging generations is there's going to be greater transparency. And the tools that we have in our hands will democratize access to information, and so forth. Ironically, however, the current generation can feel pretty helpless. Now, a study was done during the dot-com era when huge wealth was created. The children of the people who were creating that wealth felt hopeless. We won't have it as good as our parents. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and so forth. And part of the job of media is to induce angst and anxiety so that we keep coming back to look at the media. That's part of the news cycle. Let me give you an illustration. In about 2000, a major publication was predicting that within a short amount of time, major news outlets would be gone. So your mainstream media would be gone. Why? Because anybody could access information. But mainstream media is still here. How does it remain quote unquote relevant, or how is there a perpetuated demand for mainstream media? And it's through the perpetuation of fear. What's gone wrong today? There's been a flood in Texas. There's been a war in the Middle East. There's been bombing. There's been famine. There's been this refugee crisis or whatever. And we're glued to the news cycles to find out what went wrong. And so, it's in the interest of news media to perpetuate a cycle that says things are really, really bad. Looking at history as a whole, actually, things have got a lot better. Things have got better. So literacy rates have improved. Infant mortality has dropped like a stone. The amount of people living in poverty has dropped over the last 100 years like crazy. The number of democracies has increased. Even though we think about war going on, the number of wars have decreased. And so there have been many, many factors. Life expectancy in many places has increased. There are some things that are going in the wrong direction, like birth rates, for example. But overall, there has been a huge improvement. And yet we feel there's a problem. And why? Because there are narratives out there that say, yeah, life is bad, life is not so good. And so it's easy to feel disempowered, despondent, hopeless. And the introduction of AI can add to that. This morning I was speaking to somebody in the media industry, somebody who produces films, and he was saying AI is a huge threat to our industry. And it's easy to feel I'm going to be replaced by a robot. AI is going to take away my job. Well, is it? And what is the future going to look like? We don't exactly know. But what I'd like to postulate is that we are in that in-between, where the trapeze artist, if you like, is in the air between the one that swung him there or her there and the one who's going to catch them. And we're in that awkward in-between moment. And there's a set of rules and guidelines. There are things that define the in-between that are not the end state, and they're not the state of where we came from. And we need to ask ourselves, if we believe that we're in that in-between, whether it's politically, economically, what's going on in the world politically, or whether it's actually spiritually, which I'll cover in the next podcast, because in the next podcast, I'm going to talk about the major inflection points in history from a spiritual perspective. We'll unpack that. If we're in this in-between, what does it look like to get a bag of money, to get a purse, to get a sword for the short duration of time, relatively short, that we're in between major shifts in the operating model of how society works in history? That's the question that I'm asking myself. And I think it's a question which you should consider. If you think, well, the stock market keeps going up, political parties come and go, but nothing is changing that's really, really a serious change, then keep going. Get a balanced portfolio, invest your money to the index, get a steady job, which is fine. Do what you're going to do. Things will come out in the wash and you don't have to worry. If you think, well, actually, there is a big change coming in society, then the question is, as followers of Jesus, as people of the book, as people of faith, what defines such a change? And how do we prepare for it and adjust to it? I'm going to cover that in the next podcast and recommend that we just dig a bit deeper into that topic. So, leaving you with a hanging question over here. We're in business as usual, or are we heading into a new era of opportunities and possibilities, an era of innovation, an era of doing more with less, an era of solving some of the world's biggest problems, an era where the rules are rewritten? And it feels challenging right now because we have to let go of the one in order to get to the other. What do we do in the in-between? Those are my questions, and I'll try to unpack that a bit in the next podcast because I've already kept you for 20 minutes. Have a great day.